Welcome to this final video in the Bible section. Remember, this spans weeks 2 and 3, and this is going to be my opportunity to unpack for you what the focus paper could look like or would look like, or how you might go about it. There are some other resources in the course as well that will help you in different areas along the way, but hopefully this will help you as we look at one particular passage, but also talk about at the same time one of the larger themes in the Bible. So we're kind of doing double duty with this particular piece. So we're going to be looking together at the passage from Exodus 5:22 to 6 verse 8, and I'm going to read it for you just to highlight or remind you what this story is. It's a really significant story in the Exodus story, the removal of the people from slavery in Egypt. And then I want you just to note on the side there the focus and what that means. So when you're writing your focus paper, here's what you're doing. You're finding what's there, you're observing and questioning, you're considering words and phrases, you're understanding insights, and then you're asking yourself the question, so what? So let me quickly read this passage to you. Remember, it is a narrative, it is a story. And so we're in the middle of a story, and it says this in chapter 5, verse 22. God returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." That's the end of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of the country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I've heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I've remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with a mighty act of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. This section of God's Design is taken from a book called God's Design, actually written by my father-in-law, Elmer Martins, who is an Old Testament scholar. Well, let's look first of all at this passage. What do we see? Well, we see a couple things. I already mentioned this was a narrative. We also see that it's a dialogue. Moses comes with his complaint and God responds. And the passage I read was from the New International Version. So then, I mean, that's it. That's what we see. So you should be able to do that fairly simply as you work on this project. Well, what are some observations and questions? Well, I want you to encourage you as you're crafting your paper to read the passage over and over. If you have multiple Bibles in the house, or you can do this on Bible Gateway or Blue Letter Bible, look at different translations. We talked about the different types of translations, right? From word to word, to grasping the meaning, to a paraphrase. Read them all, read a number of them to try to get a sense of what's going on. And then make 2 columns on your page. On one hand, you won't be submitting this. I just encourage you, it'd be really useful. On the one hand, write down observations. What are some interesting things you see? What sort of jumps off the page at you? What do you kind of scratch your head about and think, what is going on here? That's great. And then what are some questions that you might need to explore a little bit further? So in this particular text, there's a whole lot about God's name. So that could be one question. What does his name mean? He talks about a covenant. What does a covenant mean? And why is there a chapter break in the middle of this story? And so let's look together, first of all, at this idea about this chapter break. Why is there this break? Well, on the one hand, there's a scene change. It's like Moses comes storming back after meeting with Pharaoh, and he's angry, and he said, God, why did you send me here? This is terrible. It's just all this stuff going wrong. And then it shifts to God responding. So it's this unified conversation and one particular issue that you might want to observe, or some questions you might want to ask, a frustrating situation and a response. Notice too, just quickly, that God does not zap Moses with a lightning bolt for being frustrated with him. It's okay. We can have emotions and feelings and bring our frustrations to God. That's just a side point about this story. Well, who are the characters? So again, we're still observing. It's Moses. The audience would have been the Israelites reading this story later on. What's the context? Well, they're in the middle of slavery, and the central purpose is this idea that God is bringing deliverance. So as we break it down, we can again still see Moses talks to God, and then God replies to Moses. Moses asks his questions, he makes statements, God responds, and I'll just highlight this real quickly. There's a number of things going on in this particular text. So God's responding. He gives two different speeches, one in verse 1 and then 2. So again, as you're breaking down, working on your focus paper, you may want to outline and try to create something similar to this, where you're outlining the section. This section in red is what we call God's design. It's essentially God highlights that he's going to do 4 things for the Israelites. He's going to save them, also known as redeem, rescue. He's going to bring them into a community. He's going to bring them and connect them with one another. He's also going to put them in relationship with himself. And then he's going to lead them to the land that he's promised for them. So there's this incredible thing. And again, I encourage you to try to break out what's going on in this particular section. Well, now we're moving to the next part of the focus piece, which is to consider. So we've talked about finding what's there. We've talked about observation. Now we're talking about considering. So you want to look at some words and phrases. If we were to do a word study on the name of Yahweh, it's this idea of God. It's God's name, and as I'll show you here, there's a number of different ways to translate it and a number of different meanings. God is Yahweh is the transliteration. The Jewish language doesn't use vowels, so it would actually be YHWH. The early translations, like the King James, called it Jehovah. You may be familiar with that phrase. The current consensus of scholars is that it would be Yahweh, and it's a personal name. Now, in your Bible, you'll see all capital letters, L-O-R-D, and that's this word. But there are other names in Hebrew for God, Adonai and Elohim, and you can read those for yourself. So here's this key text where God says who he is, and you can see the all caps letters there. I just wanted to show you that text. So what is Yahweh? It kind of comes from the verb to be. So it's essentially God saying a variety of things. It's this name that has multiple meanings. And you need to understand that in those days, knowing someone's name often was a way to gain power over them. It was sort of this magical incantation kind of thing. And so by Moses even asking God's name back at the burning bush, which I showed you the text for a moment ago from Exodus chapter 3, it could have been portrayed that Moses was trying to say, ooh, this is some new God. I want some power over this God. And by saying Yahweh, or by saying the way that God's name is, he's saying multiple things. So there's no way to sort of pin him down. God exists. He causes to be what he causes to be. He will be what he will be. He's a mystery, but also he's the God who saves, the deliverer. One other way of thinking about it is it's almost like a breath, Yahweh. It's this idea of our very being and our very breath. God is present. And so a lot of things to think about. And again, as you're focusing on words and phrases, this is a way to do this. So I want to encourage you on your paper to only use nouns or adjectives. Verbs are too hard, too complicated, and don't use names. I know we've just given an example of a name, the name of God, but in your text, don't worry about trying to, figure out who this person was and all that kind of thing. Look at nouns, look at adjectives, and really dive deep on those particular words. Well, now we're moving into understanding the insights. And I have to say, my colleagues at the Tabor Bible Department love their acronyms. And so they have this acronym, Peace Acts. So as you're trying to understand the text, if this is useful to you, please use it. But are there promises to claim? Are there emotions to be expressed? Assistance, commands, examples. And so in this particular passage, we've got God's design. That's a promise. We've got emotions. We've got frustration. We've got anger. We've got an example of Moses being honest to God, like I mentioned earlier, and the fact that God doesn't zap him with a lightning bolt, but God respects and allows him to have his emotions. Then the acts part. Can we adore? Is there a cry? Are we giving thanks? Is there a request? And you can again see how those might play out as you're interpreting this particular passage. Finally, another acronym for you. You can remember God's design in a simple word, ARCS, ARCS. The abundant life, which is land that God promises, the relationship to God, the community, and the salvation. In a sense, that's a complete reversal of how it was laid out in the text. But it makes it a little bit easier to remember. Abundant life, relationship with God, community, and salvation. So what do we do with this particular passage? And this is the final section. So what? How do you make it personal? Well, in our case, in this passage, we can understand God's character, that he has a purpose, and that it's okay to be honest with him. So what are some life lessons? We can be honest with God. We can trust him. We can participate in his mission. I want to just remind you, there's this section here that you can look at. It highlights a variety of things from the idea of God's design. And I want to remind you that this is a little passage. You may want to look at this again, just to remind you how to frame this focus paper. I look forward to reading them as we work on this. And I'll see you in the next videos for the next section, section 3, unit 3, where we talk about Jesus.